Israel-United States relations refer to the bilateral relationship between Israel and the United States. Since the 1960s, the United States has been a very strong supporter of Israel. It has played a key role in the promotion of good relations between Israel and its neighboring Arab states, namely Jordan, Lebanon and Egypt, along with several others in the 2020 Abraham Accords, while also holding off hostilities from other Middle Eastern nations such as Syria and Iran. Relations with Israel are a very important factor in the U.S. government's overall foreign policy in the Middle East, and Congress has likewise placed considerable importance on the maintenance of a close and supportive relationship. Since 1985, the United States has provided nearly $3 billion in annual grants to Israel, which has been the largest recipient of annual American aid from 1976 to 2004 and the largest cumulative recipient of aid since World War II. Approximately 74% of these funds are spent on the purchases of American goods and services. More recently, in fiscal year 2019, the United States provided Israel with $3.8 billion in military aid. Israel also benefits from around $8 billion in American loan guarantees, while the United States has disbursed significant economic aid for Israel in the past. The primary form of American aid for Israel at present is military-oriented rather than economic. In addition to financial and military aid, the United States also provides large political support to Israel, having used its United Nations Security Council veto power 42 times with respect to resolutions relating to Israel, out of a total 83 times in which its veto has ever been used. Between 1991 and 2011, out of the 24 vetoes invoked by the United States, 15 were used to protect Israel. Bilateral relations have evolved from an initial American policy of sympathy and support for the creation of a Jewish homeland in 1948 to a partnership that links a small but powerful Israeli state with an American superpower trying to balance influence against other competing interests in the region, namely those of Russia and its allies. Some analysts maintain that Israel is a strategic ally for the United States, and that relations with the former will strengthen the latter's influence in the Middle East. Israel is designated by the United States as a major non-NATO ally, and was the first country to be granted this status alongside Egypt in 1987. Israel and Egypt remain the only countries in the Middle East to have this designation. Jesse Helms, an American senator with the Republican Party, referred to Israel as America's aircraft carrier in the Middle East when explaining why the United States viewed Israel as such a strategic ally, saying that the military foothold in the region offered by the self-proclaimed Jewish state alone justified the American military aid and grants to Israel every year. As of 2021, the United States remains the only permanent member of the United Nations Security Council to have recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and moved its embassy to the disputed city from Tel Aviv in 2017. The United States is also the only country to have recognized the Golan Heights as non-occupied Israeli territory, doing so via a presidential proclamation under the Trump administration in 2019. However, under the subsequent Biden administration, the U.S. State Department's annual report on human rights violations around the world once more refers to the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights as being territories occupied by Israel. Support for Zionism among American Jews was minimal, until the involvement of Louis Brandeis in the Federation of American Zionists, starting in 1912, and the establishment of the Provisional Executive Committee for General Zionist Affairs in 1914. It was empowered by the Zionist organization to deal with all Zionist matters until better times come. Woodrow Wilson, who was sympathetic to the plight of Jews in Europe and favorable to Zionist objectives, stated on March 2, 1919, "I am persuaded that the Allied nations, with the fullest concurrence of our own government and people, are agreed that in Palestine shall be laid the foundation of a future Jewish commonwealth." And on April 16, 1919, corroborated the U.S. government's expressed acquiescence in the Balfour Declaration. Wilson's statements did not result in a change in policy of the U.S. State Department in favor of Zionist aims. However, The U.S. Congress passed the Lodge Fish Resolution, the first joint resolution stating its support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people on September 21, 1922. The same day, the Mandate of Palestine was approved by the Council of the League of Nations. During World War II, while U.S. foreign policy decisions were often ad hoc moves and solutions dictated by the demands of the war, the Zionist movement made a fundamental departure from traditional